A lost manuscript, a sealed tomb, a relic whispered about in half-forgotten legends. You know the drill. The moment someone uncovers it, that's when the story begins. For centuries, we've told ourselves about artifacts that could change the world, objects of power, of knowledge, and of danger. From ancient temples to desert ruins, the idea that something extraordinary lies just beneath the surface continues to grip us. I tell you this though, today, right here, just maybe, we're going to find out why. Hi, I'm Luke. I'm an author of archaeological adventure novels. I travel the world looking for stories to put into my books and to share with you right here on the Adventure Story Podcast. Just quickly before we dive in, if you would like some more adventure in your life, and I think you probably would, I would love to welcome you inside the Adventure Society. This is my weekly newsletter, and it's your ticket to travel with me, to share my real-world adventures, and to find out first when a new story or a new season of the podcast drops. Head to lukerichardsonauthor.com/Adventure Society to get your place now. Right, let's get going. So, why do lost artifacts make such perfect fuel for adventure stories? Why does archaeology, that slow, methodical, often painstaking process in real life, transform so effortlessly into high-stakes fiction? Well, today, Kevin Tumlinson and I aim to find out why. Kevin is one of those adventure writers that I used to read before writing books like this myself. The creator of the Dan Kotler archaeological thrillers series, Kevin has built a career around ancient mysteries, buried secrets, and the thrill of discovery. So when he agreed to join me, I just knew we had to talk about why we think the adventure genre is one that keeps readers coming back time and again. Kevin, welcome to the Adventure Story Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to clip that intro and start playing it every time I appear on camera.
I hope it didn't make you feel, too old, thinking this is, when people quote the people they read before, it's Mark Twain and Ernest Hemingway and Kevin Tumlinson.
I have fairly recently, within the past 9 months or so, I have become good friends with Orson Scott Card. He was the guy that I was trying to emulate when I first started writing. And he and I chat frequently now. I mean, we haven't in a couple of months, but we chat via Zoom. He's learned that he'll start telling me stories about some of his books, and he's learned that I know all the stories. I've read everything. If that guy wrote the phone book, I would have read the phone book. But he kind of cringed a little when I was like, "Yeah, when I was in high school, I read Ender's Game, and it changed my life." He's like, "Oh, high school, man." So,
that's it. Well, I hope I didn't make you feel that way, but
nah.
There we go.
It's
there
good.
we go. So we're talking today then about the sort of stories we write, which is a great topic I think we can both talk about. And they involve, or some of the stories you write and some of the stories I write involve lost artifacts, ancient mysteries, secret societies, history, myths, these sorts of things.
Yeah.
Why do you think that's such an intriguing premise to readers and to writers?
I mean, for writers, it's obvious. It's a MacGuffin, right? We want that object of desire that everybody wants, that we can't allow everyone to just have. That gives us some intrinsic motivation for the book. So, that's storytelling gold. It makes the storytelling easier because what we're doing usually as writers is, the object almost doesn't matter because, you could insert, just think about Indiana Jones. If Indiana Jones had gone into a temple, let's say instead of retrieving the Ark of the Covenant, he went and got the Spear of Destiny, or maybe he got the Philosopher's Stone or whatever. Would that story change intrinsically?
No,
probably not.
No, of course not. No.
So it's kind of a shortcut for the writers. For the readers, the reason it's interesting is that all of us have this dream that there's some object that can change our lives, that can, if I could drink from that holy grail, I'd be cured of all illness and I'd live forever. Or if I had the Ark of the Covenant, my enemies would be smited. We all love that idea of some object imbued with supernatural power or, mystery. The mystery of these things is also intriguing. Like consider like the Shroud of Turin, for example. We don't know. I mean, I know that thing is fake, frankly. I hate to admit it, but I mean, the evidence is kind of in.
I like that. We don't know, but I know.
we don't know for sure. Kevin doesn't even know for sure. Anything is possible, but that's part of the mystery to me.
Yeah,
it's like,
sure.
okay, let's just look at it. As a reader, let's say that I opened a book with, he looked at the Shroud of Turin, knowing that it was a fabrication, but, right?
I'm hooked.
So now I want to know,
Yeah.
it's a fabrication, but what's the deal? And turns out like, sure, it was fabricated, but who fabricated it and why? So now there's an unanswered question, or what we in marketing would call an open loop, which is also what we storytellers should be calling it. And open loops drive readers crazy. They got to find out. They got to see what the answer is. So that's why it's intriguing. That was a long-winded answer to your question.
No, it was a perfect answer. I think that's absolutely true. And I think because there are so many open questions about all sorts of things, aren't there? When you think about history and humanity and all of these things, different people have different theories, but even those miss parts, no one is completely perfect, is it, in answering life's greatest questions? So actually, the things that we talk about sort of fill the gap.
Right. There's too many mysteries. I think even those among us who, I'm just going to go out on a limb here, but like those among us who are not, say atheist or agnostic, there's still a tendency to still think of there being some power greater than us out there, that we are curious about. Even if we can't bring ourselves to believe in the flying spaghetti monster or, my personal Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. If you can't believe in that, it doesn't change the fact that there are things that happen in the universe that we don't understand. And so we're always going to be looking for answers. Quantum physics is like that. Even if you don't believe in a deity, quantum physics will freak you out when you look closely at it because it doesn't make any logical sense. I mean, and so we're always looking for answers to like why existence is so strange. And we're always looking at, there's always something greater than us. The universe itself, by its very nature, is expansive, it's mysterious, it's unexplorable. So you never know what you're going to encounter out there. And we want desperately to know. That's what the writer's job is to give you a hint.
Yeah, it totally is. It totally is. And many of those artifacts that we talk about, they sort of flirt with the supernatural. And I suppose what I mean there by supernatural is that we don't understand how it works. I'm not saying it's necessarily like magic in the Harry Potter sense, although of course it could be. How do you as a writer decide on that balance on like, it needs to have that supernatural, that we don't know all the answers element, but also it needs to be this could happen? Where's the line, do you think?
You got to start with understanding what supernatural really means. It does, we tend to say supernatural when we have a box we put it in. Oh, it's magic. Oh, it's God. It's, angels or whatever, aliens even. Supernatural just means it is somehow above the norm, like it's somehow outside of what we know as normal reality. That's going to be supernatural. I mean, sometimes you just go straight for, something chaotic and weird happened.
Yeah.
Something I have done with the Dan Kotler books from the beginning. I started my career writing sci-fi. I still do, but I wrote sci-fi and a little bit of fantasy. And in those, the sort of supernatural element is front and center. And sometimes it's not even explainable. There's just something happening. You're never going to get a full explanation. What I did with Dan Kotler was, there are supernatural things that can happen, but they're almost always grounded in something natural and real. And so for me, striking the balance is hinting at this thing that's greater than we can understand, but grounding it in such a way that the reader sees that, okay, there were Vikings in North America, and this is how they got to Pueblo, Colorado. Or this rune is tied into a lost science that we no longer understand. The balance is it can be challenging to find because with that series, everything has to be very grounded, right? So if I hint at something truly supernatural, I have to give it a foundation. I have to give it a reason for being. So making the decision, like deciding what's too much, if I can't give it an explanation, even if that explanation turns out to be wrong or inadequate, then it can't go into the book. And a lot of the explanations I give for some of the more supernatural things that happen in my books are inadequate to explain. It's that whole thing, you've probably seen this, where it's like the Christmas episodes of an adventure show, and they go through all this stuff. Throughout the whole episode, it looks like Santa could actually be real. And then you find out it's just some billionaire, whatever. But then while the billionaire is there having cookies with them, a present magically appears under the tree.
Yeah.
And everyone looks at each other. So that's what I'm talking about. Like even though you can explain it, even though the Scooby Gang can pull the mask off and show that it was Old Man Peters all along, there's always that one piece that didn't get explained. That's what keeps the readers coming back. That's the hook.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yes. Because that sort of sets up the next story often, doesn't it? It's like, did you look over there for the thing? And then that's, of course, where the next book's going to take place, in that in that next place. Oh, that's
right.
That thing. So in our stories, it's never as simple as there's just this magic coin that proves the existence of this, that, and the other. There's always a villain who wants it for his or her own ends, isn't there? There's always that antagonist who has to sort of be one step ahead 90% of the time, and then the protagonist saves the day. Why do you think that makes such a compelling hook? Why is that so important,
Yeah, we like to overcome the odds. That's what we love. Underdog stories. We love stories of people fighting the good fight and winning. And sometimes we like to see stories where the bad guy won. And maybe the victory is a sort of Pyrrhic victory, that like the good guy won, but he also lost a lot. He won, but his girlfriend perished in the fire. So, sometimes we like those kind of stories, but for the most part, people are out looking for stories where they get to see the disadvantaged, weaker person, the character that they can identify with, overcoming the overwhelming, all-powerful bad guy. We love that because we can empathize with the weak character and we feel powerless in our lives a lot of times. And so if government is doing things we don't like, we can read fiction about people overcoming government. If we're suffering from an illness, we can read fiction about people overcoming illness, and it gives us hope. That's what everybody's out there looking for. And in these adventure stories, in my books and in the Indiana Jones films or whatever, you've got this hero who's kind of larger than life. He's going to win, but you get to see him get the hell beat out of him for 90 minutes or 300 pages or whatever. And it looks like he's going to lose. And then he rallies and wins anyway. It makes us feel like we could do the same thing.
You're absolutely right. There is an element of sort of self-reflection there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Our books lean quite a lot into history. Some of it very solid history, like a realistic period of time. Other parts of it slightly more speculative. But at what point do you balance that historical accuracy? I suppose this is sort of what we talked about, the myth and the supernatural as well. At what point do you think that historical accuracy needs to be important? Or do you think the narrative is the engine of the thing? Where does that balance lie?
If you're going to connect your story to a known period or a known event in history, you're going to need accuracy to a degree. When I wrote Atlantis Riddle, I opened with Thomas Edison watching the labs that he had burned down. They were in New Jersey, right? He's watching them burn to the ground and he's celebrating. Okay, so that's a real event. It's a real outcome. He actually was excited. He told his son to go get his wife to come watch the whole thing burn down because she would never see anything like this again. There'll never be a sight like this again. And so I took that as a real event, and I portrayed it accurately, but I wanted to turn it on its head and explain why he was so excited about it. Because that the whole crux of the book from that point forward is really kind of a reflection of why he was celebrating that this lab burned down, you know? So I opened a loop, I asked a question, and then the reader had to follow me to get the answer to the question, right? I think when you are talking about real world events and real world people, you need to get those details right. But the reader is going to be very forgiving when you take a left turn, especially if it's one of these scenarios where it's like history didn't quite play out the way you think it did. If you can give them an alternate version of, not an alternate version of what did happen, but an alternate version of why it happened, that's the kind of story that readers will follow.
Exactly right. Exactly right. It's a sort of like, it fits 90%, doesn't it? And you're just sort of making up the little 10%, and that's forgiven because that fits with the story and that fits with where you're going.
Well, it also, that's part of why these readers gravitate to these books, because there are question marks like that in history. You know, they're not going to get an answer otherwise. You've got all kinds of events in history that didn't have neat resolutions. So we're there to kind of, you know, fill in the gaps a little, you know, without overcommitting. You know, you don't want to say definitively that this is what happened with that artifact or whatever. You want to give the reader, you want to leave some questions open, but some of the great mysteries like D.B. Cooper back in like the 50s, super famous story, but no one knows what happened to that guy after he jumped out of the plane. He robbed like a bank or something. He boarded an airplane. In mid-flight, he basically puts on a parachute, jumps out of the plane. We don't know what happened to that guy. Now, we have since like found some evidence, like people have found some of the money, all destroyed, charred, you know, bills and things like that out in the area where he jumped, but we don't know what happened to him. So that's fertile ground, man. You've got an intriguing story. You got a guy who stole an artifact, in this case, money, and he did something crazy, jumped out of an airplane, and then disappeared. And then 70 years later, we still don't know what the heck happened to him. Lots of room to play in that, right? That's the kind of story that's gold for authors like us. Because you see similar stories, like I wrote about the Mayan death god Apush. There's a lot of stuff about that mythical figure that's just a big giant question mark. I have the advantage of no one's heard of that character. So I can paint him however I like. The real historic stuff that's surrounding, like why he had owls as a symbol, right? Why? Why is an owl a symbol of this god? Well, it turns out that culture believed owls would carry spirits off to the underworld when people died. And so it became a symbol of death. And, all these little tidbits you can throw in there. You're introducing the reader to this character and then introducing them to the mythos and then introducing all these mysteries, and then you're solving all the mysteries. And they get to be right there in the passenger seat the whole time Dan Kotler is looking into it. That's exciting.
It is exciting. It is exciting. But sometimes we do have to amp up that excitement, don't we? Because research itself, and archaeology especially, is really slow and methodical and bureaucratic. Yeah. And I often get messages from, in inverted commas, real archaeologists who say, I love your books, but...
Yeah.
But we have to up the stakes, don't we? We have to move that forward because that's the story.
The reality here is, if anybody had to go through the stuff that Dan Kotler or Indiana Jones went through on a regular basis, they wouldn't survive long enough to actually be archaeologists,
That's true.
Yeah, we do too. We take some liberty there. Rightly so. I mean, that the same is true for all fiction. Even romances don't go the way, real world romance does not work the way fiction romance works.
Really?
Right? I mean, I thought it did for years, but no. Turns out romance is hard. Relationships are difficult. There's things that you're not prepared to deal with. I won't go into the intimate details, but when you get into a relationship, it ends up not being softly lit with dramatic music in the background.
Sure.
But that's the thing. That's what we're here for, is to present an idealized version of these stories so that they are fun and exciting. I guess if you're trying to determine how much of that to do or when to do it. The whole point is to keep the reader turning pages. So if the story is dragging, nobody wants to read the real accounts of an archaeologist at work. Nobody. Trust me. I have met and worked with. I've been on dig sites. This is not entertaining stuff. This is not fun. There's nothing dramatic about it. It's only exciting at a sort of cerebral level. I've been in the hot sun, high humidity, out in the middle of nowhere, meticulously brushing dirt off things. Nobody wants to read that. They want to see 30 seconds of that to establish what's going on. And then they want to see this character discover that, this is that rare lost gem that turns people into frogmen. They want that. That's what they're willing to tolerate. 30 seconds. They're not willing to tolerate an entire novel that's realistic with its look into archaeology.
You are absolutely right there. And I think we sort of forget that at our peril, don't we? We forget that that people aren't used to that. You don't need to see it in that sort of minutiae. To sort of move things forward, thinking more about the present and the future now, and this is something I find interesting in my own books, is that technology has changed exploration and discovery and archaeology and all these things so much and continues to do. We're talking like satellites, AI, LiDAR, GPS.
LiDAR, yeah.
And now there's like AI models that can decode ancient scripts, probably better certainly more quickly than humans can. Do you think that modern tech has made archaeological adventure harder to write, or has it just made it a different genre?
It's changed the genre a little, but in some ways it's made it easier because now, rather than me having to write an interesting scene where Kotler is poring over, scrolls and trying to decipher ancient languages, he feeds it into an AI and now has to deal with the result. And that's the part that's fun and exciting for people. The rest of it is just nostalgia. The rest of it is just fantasy about what, like I said, nobody really wants to see that. And we always glossed over that part anyway, right? If Kotler was going to spend 6 days, studying ancient manuscripts, it happened in a couple of paragraphs, and then I moved on. For him, it was a grueling 6 days. For the reader, it was one paragraph. But now I don't even have to put my character through that torture. I can have him discover something, send it to a lab, get the results back that afternoon, and act on that information. I can have him engaged in something else. That's what everybody's there for anyway. Everybody wants to see, basically, the entertaining thing about any novel is watching the character respond to things. So it doesn't really matter that much how he got the stimulus. It's how he responds to that stimulus from there that matters.
That's so true, isn't it? And I hadn't thought of it like that. Whereas before you might have said 6 months later after looking through all of these records for that whole time.
Which is the same, by the way, as saying, there's functionally in storytelling zero difference between me saying he sent this off and 6 months later got the results and me saying he sent this off and that afternoon got the results. There's no difference to the reader at all.
No,
okay?
You're absolutely right.
So it adds to the credibility of the story. And he could have him say, look, 10 years ago, this would have taken 6 months. Today, he got it in that afternoon. That's even better. That's even more interesting to people. They get to see how the technology is impacting the field. I will invent technologies, by the way.
Oh yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I have an entire series built around that, which has now become kind of obsolete because I had my Quake Runner, Alex Kane books, and she was the inventor of a quantum-based AI that's basically a universal skeleton key for any kind of digital system. What's interesting is, that was a great story. It's based on some real science from the time that I started it back in like 2016. But now there's AI is such a prolific topic that I don't think those stories could have the same impact as they had. I would have to change things a little, and I have begun changing some things, kind of playing around with a few things to see if I can update the stories. But the technology is more or less catching up with the technology of the books and surpassing it in some ways. It's not quantum-based yet. that's a whole other thing. But I don't think it's long before we see things like that. And, true artificial intelligence comes along and it's like, well, who needs to write? Nobody's going to want to read these books anymore because they're busy engaging with AI all the time. So there's nothing unique about it. So that's the danger of relying on technology as a cornerstone of your stories, by the way.
Yeah, that's
true,
true,
isn't
isn't
it?
it?
Really fast.
I haven't thought about it in that way. I try and, if I use technology, which I do, of course, but it's very much like the story isn't about the technology. The technology is there. I think you said this earlier, you make a phone call, you scan something, whatever. You don't care how it works, but it works, and that's the result.
I mean, you have to be careful. And I used to write in a whole lot of existing tech, modern consumer tech, talking about iPads and iPhones and things like that all the time. And then I realized, the danger here is, as much as it seems like this stuff is here to stay forever now, look how rapidly things can change. I mean, imagine, that we lived in the era of telegraphs, and everybody's sending telegraphs, and the whole story revolves. I've written a novel that is a series of telegraph messages, and then 30 years later, nobody's even using a telegraph anymore or whatever. So that story feels dated. Well, the same is going to happen. We've already seen such a jump in technology. If I read books from the 80s and 90s and someone does use a cell phone, the way the cell phone is described is so archaic that it makes it stand out and throws me right out of the story.
So it's almost described with the assumption that you don't know what it is.
Right. Well, no, it's described with the assumption that you do know what it is and that it's a common object.
Oh, I see what you mean, yeah.
But to the modern reader, it's like, why is he carrying around a phone in a bag? What's that about? And computers, so you may be aware of Stieg Larsson. He wrote the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the whole Millennium series, which I loved. I was enough of a geek. When he wrote that, it was during the era where I was really into all that technology, and so was he, obviously. Like, he's describing the MacBook that she's using and how powerful it is. And it has 100 megabytes of storage. It's just, it's so quaint now to read it. It dates it so poorly that it made me realize I have to avoid direct references to things like that. You got to vague up the technology.
I also feel that there's a window it's a moving window in that sort of thing. Now, you're talking about something here that's about 20 years old. So it's in that age in which it is not yet cool again. Whereas, leave it another 10 years and it'll be like, because now we talk about Walkmans, where you put the tape or the CD in or whatever, or mini disc players, and you'd be like, wow, that's so cool,
But if you write about a Walkman today, you're going to describe it as if the audience doesn't have any idea what it is. But if you wrote about a Walkman in 1985, you just said, popped a tape in his Walkman and he put his earphones on. No, people are going to be like, what do you mean tape? What's a Walkman? Why do you need headphones for it?
That's true.
I mean, even the term headphones now, I think, is getting a bit dated. I mean, we're back to having over-ear headphones again, even wireless ones. But most people are like, I popped my AirPods in. I put my earbuds in or whatever. And we understand that now, but 30, 40 years from now, will we? When everybody's got an implant that's a cochlear implant that just vibrates the bones in their ear so that everything that's said on their mobile device is in their head, is anybody going to understand what headphones are or earbuds?
You're
Why would I
absolutely
put
right.
something in my ear? That's gross.
You're absolutely right. I love that. I love that idea.
We're talking right now, everything you are experiencing right now is an artifact, is waiting to become an artifact in a story 100 years from now.
And that's the point. That's the interesting thing here, isn't it? Because I'm wondering that with the sort of technology, we learn more and more all the time. We know more and more. And I wonder whether these sorts of stories change, right? The archaeological thrillers of today are perhaps like the sci-fi books of the future, because we're not exploring the surface of the Earth. Maybe we're exploring the depths of the ocean, or even the dark side of the moon. And these things, because they become more regular and normalized, that's how the genre goes, perhaps.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of started this by saying, like, it almost does not matter what the artifact is. The thing that matters in these stories is the way the characters interact, how they respond to what's happening. Generally, what you're going to do is, if you've got an artifact-based story, you've got the MacGuffin, the artifact of question, of desire, whatever it is. The story you're telling is, why does everyone want it? What danger does it represent if the bad guy gets it? How far will the protagonist go to prevent the bad guy from getting it? What are the consequences? What's the price that the protagonist pays to keep it out of the hands of the bad guy? And that is the story. And it doesn't matter what the artifact is, except that the artifact makes it intriguing to the. So, if I rewrite one of my books and I replace, say, or if I rewrote Indiana Jones and replaced the Ark of the Covenant with a rubber duck, it changes what the story is, only in its energy and its essence. If the characters were still taking those seriously, the reader or the viewer would probably take it seriously to a degree as well. But they might not give that story a chance because there's no mystery around a rubber duck, right? Except the general mystery of what the heck is up with this rubber duck. Yeah, that kind of makes me want to write a book with a rubber duck as
I certainly think you should. Yeah.
The rubber duck of destiny.
I like that a lot. Kevin, this is fantastic. So to conclude, I ask everyone this question, and I think it's a really nice touch point for all my guests. What adventure stories first made you fall in love with lost cities, ancient secrets, and just this general thrill of discovery?
Indiana Jones is right up there at the top. That was the first stories of that genre that I ever encountered. But I read books when I was a kid, like Encyclopedia Brown was a big favorite of mine. And even though that didn't involve lost cities or whatever, exploring mysteries and solving puzzles, I kind of tell people sometimes that Dan Kotler is basically Encyclopedia Brown all grown up. But I read a lot and watched a lot of stories like Choose Your Own Adventure, for example. I read every Choose Your Own Adventure, and almost all of them involved this kind of story. Some ancient temple, artifact, whatever. And then, the cartoons and things I watched. But I read tons of comic books growing up. It was probably how I learned to write, honestly. I read every Spider-Man I can get my hands on. And the number of times that ancient cities, lost civilizations, ancient artifacts would pop up in those, it's uncountable.
Oh, that's fantastic. Kevin, where can people find you and your books?
You can find me at kevintumlinson.com. That's all things Kevin are there. And if you are a writer, I have the Wordslinger podcast that you will want to tune into for sure. You can find it on that site, but you can also go to youtube.com/Wordslinger podcast.
Thank you so much. That was great.
You got it.
This is the Adventure Story Podcast, and thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you've enjoyed the show, please subscribe, please like, and please share. It will take you just seconds, but really helps me spread the word about this show. If you have a story you'd like me to explore or a guest that you think would sound great on the podcast, let me know in the comments or hello@lukerichardsonauthor.com. If you need more adventure in your life, and let's be honest, who doesn't, you might like to join the Adventure Society. This weekly newsletter is your ticket to travel with me, to share real-world adventures and find out when a new story or a new season of this podcast drops. Head to lukerichardsonauthor.com/adventure society to secure your place now. And if you're a fan of adventure stories like the one we've talked about today, check out my books at lukerichardsonauthor.com. Bon voyage, enjoy the adventure, and I'll see you next time.